with Manju, with your host, Dr. Manju Sheth.
Hello and welcome to Chai with Manju. We are thrilled and honored to have Mr. John Sculley as our special guest today. He was the legendary CEO of Apple, president of Pepsi. He's an entrepreneur. He's an investor. He is also working with a local company in our neck of the woods, Nirvana and Eterna Health. We are thrilled that he is going to be our chief guest at New England Choice Awards on November 15th. Let's meet him. Hello and welcome. I have to tell you, you are an interviewer's dream come true. So I'm really flying high today. So thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Manju.
Oh, thank you. So my first question for you. You are one of the most iconic global leaders of our times. When I was telling my family and friends, even in India and England, that I'm going to interview you, the first thing they said, why don't you make it live? So people learn so much from you. So I'm going to take you right from the beginning. You were born in New York. You were only 5 days old when you moved to Bermuda. Your mom is from Bermuda, and she was a horticulturist, and your dad was a Wall Street lawyer. What were your early years like that influenced your life or taught you some valuable lessons that you became such an incredible success? So please share.
Well, I was very lucky, particularly in the years I was in Bermuda, that my grandfather, who was born in 1875, and he never went to college, but he went and became an apprentice in Liverpool and earned his apprenticeship as a marine engineer, and he was an inventor.
Okay.
And so I spent a great deal of time with my grandfather because I was born with an insatiable curiosity. I still have an insatiable curiosity. And my grandfather and I would talk about things. He had a workshop. I would help him build boats. He built all his own boats.
Wow.
In that time, we're going back when Bermuda was a very subsistence living. People lived off the land. They lived off the sea. And so it was very typical that people did many things for themselves. So that was a big influence on me, my grandfather. My father was a wonderful man, but he was not into technology. He was not into the same curiosity I had, though he was an extremely good student at Princeton University, and he got his law degree, and he was highly admired by people. My mother, as a horticulturist, loved plants, and she loved people. And so she was one of the interesting things about my whole life, because my parents died when they were relatively young. And people who remembered my mom would always say she was the most amazing person we ever met, decades later. I have two brothers, and I'm the eldest of the three of us. And so when our father died in an accident, and then our mother later died of cancer, and so we pretty much were left to look after each other. So for us, we were fortunate to have had great parents when they were alive, but then as time went on, my brother Arthur and my brother David and I did a lot looking out for each other. And if you leap ahead, my brother Arthur became the CEO of J.P. Morgan's Worldwide Private Bank, and has lived most of his life outside the U.S. In the last decades, it's been in Europe, but he lived in Asia for many years. And my brother David became the CEO of H.J. Heinz.
Oh my goodness!
And so we all ended up in executive roles. And so I would give my father a lot of that credit, because he inspired us in terms of how do you deal with people, and how do you treat people the way with respect, and reward people for what they accomplish and the value of teamwork. And our mother gave us the experience of how important it is for people to get along. But what made surprise people is that my brothers and I have never had a serious argument in our entire lives.
Wow.
With each other, yeah.
That's amazing.
Which is unusual.
Yeah, very unusual. You've had a fabulous education and career locally, St. Mark's High School, then Brown University, Wharton. You were the youngest president of Pepsi, then CEO of Apple. Books have been written about you, movies have been made, and of course, like we talked, you also work with Eterna Health and Nirvana Health locally. Now, if you were to look in the rear view mirror of your life at this stage, so I'm going to ask you some questions related to that. What do you think have been the happiest moments of your life?
My happiest moments have always been moments when I'm working together with a team and we're trying to solve a challenging problem.
Okay.
And typically it involves technology, because while a lot of people identify me with marketing, what I really do is product marketing. And product marketing means that when I was at Pepsi and we were outsold 14-1 by Coca-Cola, I was put in charge of marketing. The most important thing behind our success during my time there was the invention of the first plastic bottle for soft drinks, which I'd been in charge of research and development before they put me in charge of marketing. We were developing something called methacrylonitrile plastic bottle that would have barrier walls for carbonation, for flavor, had to be biodegradable, had to be reproducible easily from a manufacturing cost. And when I was put in charge of marketing, the first thing we did was to do a consumer test where we went to 550 homes. Every week we would deliver soft drinks to them. People would pay for it, and we tracked their habits over 9 weeks. And what we discovered was no matter how much we delivered to them the week before, the next week the household inventory was always empty.
Right. So
we said, wait a minute, why are we spending time trying to make a plastic bottle that is the size of a little tiny Coca-Cola bottle? We make our money selling
the
liquid ounces.
Yes. So
we should make the biggest bottle that is practical. And so that's why we worked with DuPont to develop a PET bottle, polyethylene tetracycline, which ended up becoming a whole industry in itself. But we were in the marketplace 3.5 years before Coca-Cola realized what happened. And we were able to get AC Nielsen to track us not on physical bottles, but on equivalent, 8-ounce equivalent bottles, which meant for every 64-ounce bottle, there were 8-ounce equivalents. And at the end of those 3 years, AC Nielsen gave us an award for the longest consecutive market share of any consumer product they'd ever measured. And Coca-Cola says, what are you talking about? We don't see it in our reports. And they said, yeah, because you're tracking physical bottles. And the industry was moving towards the large plastic bottle. So whether it was at Pepsi, which, we did things like the Pepsi Challenge advertising campaign.
That was famous, Pepsi
People
Challenge.
think that's the thing that made the difference. It was a very successful campaign, but more important was the invention of the plastic bottle, figuring out the logistics of how do you set up co-op blowing plants to be able to get preforms to bottle could then have their own plastic bottles. They'd be blown up in injection blow molding machine, and all of these logistics that were about developing supply chains, figuring out the technology, figuring out the cost of technology. And so I'm a product marketer, but I'm focused as much on not only what you build, but how you build it, and what are the costs of it, and how do you get a differentiation, and how do you get a head start.
I think you were also one of the first ones to focus on customer experience. Now that's become a big thing, but when I was reading, I said that was very new when you were there, right?
Yeah,
customer experience.
It was, and just to give you another part of my life, when I was at Apple, I had been recruited to Apple because the board had fired the first CEO of Apple. Steve Jobs wanted to be CEO. They said he wasn't ready. So they gave him the approval of whoever they hired. He turned down everyone that the board came up with. So David Rockefeller, an early investor, said, well, why don't you go to a different industry in a different part of the country? And that's how led to me being recruited as a candidate. And Steve and I spent 5 months getting to know one another. And he would go to New York, I would go to Cupertino, so we're opposite sides of the country. And the final decision came in end of March, 1983. And what happened then was I turned Steve down. And he said to me, do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Remember, I was at PepsiCo.
Yes.
Or do you want to come with me and change the world? And so I thought about it for the next few days. And a week later, I was a new employee at Apple because I always would have wondered what I would have missed if I didn't do that, which is another characteristic of my life. I have insatiable curiosity and I'm a huge risk taker. And I'm willing to take risks on things that I've become curious about and have tried to learn enough about and found people who I can trust and respect. So it's a combination of how do you deal with your curiosity, how do you look beyond what is the conventional wisdom, and what are the risks involved.
You said it very famously that people who take risks are the ones you lose out to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So looking back, do you think it was the right decision to, by the board and the team, to let go of Steve Jobs when that happened?
Well, I first of all, he was not let go.
He said he was fired. So.
He wasn't fired. But what happened was that the Macintosh office that Steve introduced in 1985 was meant to be a great success, and it wasn't a great success. And it was being made fun of by people in the industry. The sales were terrible. And Steve came to me and he said, it's all your fault, my fault. And I said, he was running the Macintosh division. I was running the Apple II division. I was CEO of the corporation. He was chairman of the corporation. So I said, Steve, why is it my fault? And he said, well, you made me price the Macintosh too high, and I want you to take the advertising from the Apple II and to put it on the Macintosh and to lower the price of the Macintosh. And I said, Steve, if we do that, we run the risk of the company going bankrupt, because when I came into Apple, the sales of the Apple II were going down, and we had to turn that around because that was the only cash flow for Apple for the next 3.5 years. And the Macintosh was years away from being profitable. So I said, we can't do that without going to the board. So we went to the board. He explained his position. I explained mine. The board said, okay, we're going to take a week. They put Michael Markkula, who was the third co-founder and was on the board as vice chairman. And they said, take a week, study it, talk to whoever you are, and report back to the board, not to John, not to Steve, but to the board. And he did, and the board made their own decision. And they said, we agree with John, we don't agree with Steve. And they said, Steve, you've been very disruptive, and we really can't afford that. These are difficult times for us at Apple. We're now back in 1985. And so Steve said he was going to take a sabbatical. And he left to take a sabbatical for 5 months. And in high tech, that's not unusual for people to take sabbaticals and go off. So when he came back, the board said, Steve, so what are you going to do? And he said, I want to stay at Apple. I want to go find a new project to work on. And then the next day, he announced that he was taking 5 of the top executives, or really engineering and a few business people from the Macintosh division. And the board got furious. And they said, Steve, that's outrageous. And so he went off and started Next Computer. And so he was never fired. and he went off to start something because he was upset that the board had lost confidence in him.
That's interesting because everywhere you read, that's how he presented, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have to tell you that I find your quotes by you very thought-provoking and very inspirational. So I picked some of my favorite ones, and I'm going to ask you, and you tell me how it applies to your life, or what it exactly means. Now, you said that you find that you learn most from your mistakes. Is there any mistake that you've made that you've learned a lot from?
Well, I really enjoy this part of my life because I don't run companies anymore. But I can add a bit of wisdom, and wisdom comes from making mistakes.
Right.
You don't really learn a lot from your successes.
True.
You learn from the challenges that didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to have the perseverance in your personality to say, okay, so what did we learn from that? Mm-hmm. So we can go and try it a different way and not give up. You never give up. So you want to have insatiable curiosity. You want to learn by doing things, and you want to take big risks, and you should never give up.
Perseverance.
Never. So those are characteristics in my life experience, which I feel have been very important to me at every stage of my life. And so at this stage of my life, I have no interest to retire. Mm-hmm. And so I am, my major activity is working with my partner, Ravi Aika, who's founder of Nirvana Health. Well,
Ravi is, of course, getting our Business and Entrepreneurship Award this year. We are so excited. And I heard, as we were chatting today, you've had quite a lot of experience in traveling in India, also with Ravi, right? That you're going on a trip soon.
Well, I first had an experience when Ratan Tata came in 1992, I think it was. India just opened in 1991 to the West, and Ratan led a delegation of industrialists from India to Silicon Valley, and I was his host. So we became friends and continued friends throughout his lifetime. Unfortunately, he just recently died. But he had studied architecture at Cornell University. I had studied architecture at the University of Pennsylvania before getting my MBA there. And he was just a terrific inspiration, certainly for me and anyone else who's doing well. So I started going to India back in 1993. Mm-hmm. And I've been going to India every year, sometimes several times a year.
That's more than me.
Except during the COVID year.
Right.
And I love India. My wife Diane loves India. We go there on holidays. We have many good friends in Bangalore. Wow. And we go and visit them. And it's just become a big part of our life.
How about your kids? Do they like going there? They've not been yet.
My daughter's never been there. My son has been there, and he's a Stanford physicist and mathematician.
Very nice.
So he's never worked there, but he's traveled there.
Now, another quote of yours, you said, "Timing is everything." So, how has that applied to your life? Of course, in Hindu religion, in Gita, we put a lot of focus on time. Timing. They say, only at the right time things happen. Yeah. Never before your time, and never more than your destiny you shall receive. And do you think you're a destiny's child?
Well, I never thought much about it until Ravi and I became such good friends. Because he says, "Oh no, everything's been decided now." but the way I think about timing is that it's all about risk taking.
Okay.
So you can evaluate, assess what risk might be for a particular path, but then choosing the right time to do it.
Right.
So I can't say whether it's because of predestination or whether it's because you take a chance, because remember, not everything works out, but you don't give up. You go back and try another way. But I think timing is very important, particularly since risk taking and in the context of isn't there a better way to do things, are a big part of how I think of life in the world.
One of your quotes that I find very applicable in the world of social media that we live in, where a lot of people live by the likes and comments they get on social media, and get very bothered with it. Their life gets ruled by that. But you once said that if you spend too much time thinking about how other people perceive you, then you will never break any rules. So what is your advice there, and how do you detach yourself from people? I sometimes find myself guilty of worrying about people's opinions. So how do you do that?
Well, I think people spend too much time worrying about people's opinions. I think one of the terrible things about social media, I'm not a big fan of social media, and interestingly enough, both Bill Gates and Steve Jobs would not allow their children to go online, on their own, or have a smartphone, iPhone, until they were 16. I think social media can be very, very harmful for particularly younger teenagers. So my sense is that has accentuated how people are aware of, am I being left out?
Right. The FOMO.
And it can have terrible consequences in people's lives. It's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle. But I'm sorry in many ways that social media was released, certainly in the West, the way it has been released.
So, I have to ask, you are considered the most gifted marketer in the world. So I have to ask you about marketing. One of your quotes that I really liked is that you said marketing is like, it's like theater. It's like staging a performance. So what is your advice to all the young marketers out there? How can they make their products sell?
Well, first of all, I consider myself a product marketer, not an image marketer, which doesn't mean that you don't work on the image side of your business. But you always want to work on the image side of your business in terms of, so how will the customer think, or the potential customer think? So theater is a great way to think about it. And I remember when I was at Pepsi, I first started thinking about theater because we had to motivate our bottler network to follow the things that we were proposing to them, because ultimately they were key to the decision what was going to be run and who was going to spend how much money. So I used to go to Las Vegas and I would see these shows out there and say, why is everybody in the audience so mesmerized by this? How do we get customers mesmerized about products as much as they are with entertainers? Because entertainers are really, they are their own products.
Yes.
So when I first joined Apple, Steve Jobs was extremely frustrated because he had this vision for personal computing, that the future of personal computing, remember, it was a very new industry when I joined, and the people building the industry were all engineers, and they thought computers were for other engineers and scientists and business people. They didn't think individuals would want their own computer. So I said to Steve, Steve, if I'm going to help you learn marketing, one thing you have to do is think about marketing as theater. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, think about marketing as much of how you explain things to people in ways that they can understand it and appreciate it. So a good example, and Steve became obviously the world's greatest marketer. So the student became better than the teacher. But I always love an example of marketing as theater. And I remember when Steve introduced the iPod. Now there were MP3 players around for quite a few years before the iPod. But Steve came up with a way to beautify it from design. He always believed that the personal computer should be for people, it should be beautiful as a product, it should enable people to do creative things. And the Silicon Valley engineers called this the Steve Jobs reality distortion field. They said, what a ridiculous idea. So how do we convince people it's more than just a machine for engineers? And one great example is when Steve introduced the iPod. He didn't talk about the technology. He pulls the iPod out of his pocket as he's saying, and it's a beautiful little device. No one had ever seen anything like it.
Yeah.
And he said, "How would you like to have, 1,000 songs in your pocket?"
Right.
And people thought about that. They said, 1,000 songs in my pocket in this little thing you're holding in your hand?
Sort of lugging those
And
records.
so it completely changed how people thought about technology. And he did that time after time with different product introductions. And it was usually, just one more thing. And the one more thing, of course, was the most important thing. And that's when he would pull the rabbit out of the hat or pull the device out of his pocket.
It's amazing. Going back to what Steve Jobs said to you, come and change the world. Who do you think has changed the world in last 10 years? And who do you think is going to change the world in the next 10 years?
Well, certainly in the last 10 years, no one has changed the world more than Elon Musk.
True.
And what I love about Elon Musk is that he is a physicist. So he understands the science behind things, and that's what's enabled him to change the world in so many different fields. That's very different than Steve Jobs, who also changed the world in a different era. But Steve didn't do it because he was an engineer or a scientist. He did it because he was an extremely visionary individual with great talent of recruiting people, great talent of building things, and he could dream and he could turn those into products, but it had very little to do with engineering. In fact, the reason he failed with the Macintosh in 1985 was because he didn't appreciate the fact that he was trying to get ahead of Bohr's law, which meant that the compute power of computers in 1985 were not strong enough to be able to do the things he wanted to do. But if he'd waited 2 more years, would have worked perfectly. Now, looking out into the future, Elon is still young enough that he'll probably continue to create more companies and do more things. But the reality is that the real creative talent usually is a young talent. It can be people who start in their teens. It can be people who are in their early 20s. When I was at Apple, the average age of the team that was working with Steve Jobs on the Macintosh was 22.
Right.
The youngest was 14.
Wow.
And
14?
Steve Wozniak would pick up Chris Espinoza, who was then 14, and at the bus stop and drive the rest of the way to the Apple campus. So it's expected that young people are going to be able to do things more and more because the cost of the tools to do things is becoming more and more available. And I think that the possibilities are becoming more aware to the population, and the access to capital to do this is becoming available because when you change the world, everything else changes too. So I think that we will be the nation where most of this continues to happen. But we are the innovators in the world. Doesn't mean that everyone born here is an innovator. Remember, the majority of our innovation is done by immigrants.
That's true, including Steve Jobs' family.
Including Steve Jobs' family from Syria. And if you look at the Indian population, I would say right now no one is making a bigger impact on things that change the world than the Indian population. Some are immigrants, others who have been immigrants now have children who've been born here as citizens by birth. But what I love is just in the past decade, the incredible accomplishments that the Indian population has had. And the Indian population is not typical of patting themselves on the back. No. They are very good. But the thing I've noticed in the technology world, Indians have a natural ability. It's probably as much culture as anything else, to be able to have the patience to deal with complexity. And so if you look at artificial intelligence, artificial intelligence at one level is incredibly complex. And then if you want to turn it into something that will change the world, you've got to be able to scale that complexity.
Right.
Well, that's another strong talent of Indians I know, is that not only can they solve challenging problems and have the patience to do it at a very complex level, but they also are very good at working with each other and very disciplined and careful not to make mistakes with how you build products that can scale. And so why is it that almost every major high-tech company that has anything to do with artificial intelligence has head of technology is Indian. In some cases, the CEO is Indian. The talent pool is Indian. And it's very obvious. When I was in Silicon Valley, I don't think there were many Indians in Silicon Valley then.
Even the biotech world, we are honoring Reshma at our New England Choice Awards. First woman to lead a biotech company of this level, and she happens to be Indian also.
Yeah. Kiran Mazumdar is a very close friend of myself and my wife, and we visit her many times in Bangalore.
Indra Nui at Pepsi, of course.
Yes.
Right. So
the different roles for Indians, certainly in the United States, has become highly visible.
Yes.
And it's really happened in the last 10 or 15 years.
That brings me, to the next question also, because Indians are also becoming very big in entrepreneurship. It's become such a lucrative career. And I remember when I was growing up in India, you had only two job options. Was a doctor or an engineer.
Yeah.
God forbid if you wanted to be a journalist, like I did. And of course, my husband and I are both physicians. But our only child, our daughter, who we were hoping will go in medicine, of course, completely turned it down. And she went to Babson. Then now she's in Chicago Booth. And as I told you, you're making me cool today because in her eyes, because I interview you. So what is your advice to the Gen Z entrepreneurs? What advice would you give them? Because that's the one who probably need the most.
Well, I have to tell you that the challenges that the Gen Z generation have are particularly difficult.
Right.
Because they had to go through COVID, where they interrupted their education. They have to live with the unfortunate sides of social media.
Right.
And they have not had a chance, in many cases, to have the same level of good hands-on experience working with other people physically in the same room.
That's true.
And so they may not seem like big deals, but those things are big deals.
The human contact.
And so I think the Gen Z is struggling. They're obviously talented Gen Zers, but they're struggling to say, how do I adapt? How do I adapt? How do I fit in? Where do I fit in? How do I fit
Absolutely.
in? And our generation is not particularly good at advising them because we come from an entirely different experience. We didn't grow up with social media.
Right.
We didn't have our education interrupted the way they did with COVID. And to be constantly judged in front of your peers or by people you've never met over social media, particularly difficult for girls, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I don't know how to give them good advice. I don't even use social media. So it's very different. When I grew up, my friends were ones who were what are called geeks. I wasn't a particularly good athlete, but I was very good at taking things apart and putting them together and building things. And so I hung out with other
like-minded
boys who were like-minded, who liked to do that. And I think it was maybe easier in my generation because we didn't have an organized after-school life.
Yeah.
We went off and did our own things, and we built our own clubhouses, and we all were interested in building things together. There was no organized sports. There was no system where everybody got an award. Nobody got an award. Our award was, what,
got a lot of
what we
rewards,
accomplished, what we learned.
A lot of rewards there, though. Yeah, but I think what you said made a good point for the Gen Z generation is that, that like does attract like, and to be confident who you are. Even if you're called a geek, it's good to just hang out with the same people with the same mindset, because find your tribe. I think that's where you move forward in life, right? So one thing which I was watching one of Steve Jobs' interview, and he said something which was very interesting about you. He said that you had incredible survival instincts. I don't know if you saw that interview.
No.
He said, say something new for you today. He said he kind of underestimated how incredible your survival instincts were. You look incredibly great. You're youthful, you're full of curiosity, you look so fit and wonderful. So I have to ask you, as a doctor, what's your secret?
The secret is...
Looking so good.
The major secret is I married the right woman. I have a wonderful wife, and she is a great partner in everything. She's a mathematician and a computer scientist.
Nice.
She went in the construction industry and built over 100 high-end houses in Palm Beach. I met her because she built me a house.
Oh, really?
And she is admired by so many people. We're very involved with philanthropy. And so she manages our foundation.
Okay.
And so marrying the right person makes a big difference. And I would also say, and this was not my first marriage or her first marriage, so we got it right the next time. The other thing I would say is, even as I grow older, I still have an insatiable curiosity.
Okay.
I have no interest in stopping work. I love working.
And you're very optimistic.
I'm very optimistic.
Right.
I'm not afraid of challenges. I know that there are always obstacles along the way. And I do have good survival instincts, because you have to be able to survive what happens.
Right.
If you're a risk taker, you're going to make mistakes.
Right.
You're going to have moments where you may not survive. So those things all have some interconnectedness.
So you got that right about you, even though you've not heard it before. You've been, you're such a legend, and you've done so many wonderful things. What do you think is your biggest legacy?
To be perfectly honest, I don't believe in a legacy.
No?
No, I don't think it's important. I think the best way to think about legacy is that you want the next generation to be just as curious, just as passionate, just as hardworking, and even more successful than the people who came before them. And so it's really not particularly important or relevant, whether anyone remembers my name or what I was involved with. What's important is that each generation that follows, picks up enough of what happened before, and then they take it a step beyond what any of the people before were able to do.
That's wonderful. I have to tell you, it's an absolute honor to interview you. Thank you so much for your time.